Hello and welcome to the podcast, all about becoming a health coach. I'm Megan McCrory, an integrative nutrition health coach in training. Each week, I recap what I'm learning at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition and how I'm applying it to my life. If this is your first time tuning in, I'm happy you found the podcast and a very special welcome to you. You may want to go back and listen from the beginning to hear more about my health coaching journey. For now, let's dive right into week 14. This week's lesson is module 12. It talks about the importance of walking my talk as a health coach. We also had the guest speaker, Gary Taubes, who I mentioned last episode, and he talks about the challenges of the current understanding of what causes obesity. Very fascinating topic, very fascinating book. We also learn about the concepts of volumetrics, metabolic type, calorie density, and the usefulness of the traditional weight and BMI measurements as a measure of overall health. Walking the talk, what does that mean as a health coach? So maybe you have visited a hospital or another kind of healthcare facility, and out back you see some of the staff smoking, as an example, or a doctor or nurse that is overweight or having their own health issues. So as a health coach, it's important for us to walk the talk. It's not obviously necessary for everyone to be perfect because nobody is. But part of the program that we're going through right now is to also coach the health coaches as we learn. So we're in effect getting our own health coaching as we go through. So at the end of our training, we will know how to give health coaching services to others, but we will also be able to help ourselves in the process. So like when someone sees me, I want them to be like that. That's what I want. I want that glow, the vibrance, the energy that she has. So that's what I want people to say when they see me and be like, what is she doing? And I want that. And that's really my goal, because my first goal is to make sure that I am my best self. My second goal is to be a health coach. And this is not as easy as it sounds. I mean, it is hard for normal people, for everybody to make these kind of changes, lifestyle changes over a long time. But I am with the school and with all of the tools that we're being given, I think it's coming. It's coming. In the last episode about sugar, I mentioned author Gary Taubes. He is an investigative science journalist who was kind of tipped off by some of his friends in the physics community to look into public health. He said, if you're interested in writing stories about bad science, there's a lot of bad science in public health. So he wrote the book called Good Calories, Bad Calories, and then followed that up with another book called Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It. Now, these books are essentially the same topic, but Good Calories and Bad Calories was huge, 500 plus pages, very technical. And even though it had all the information there, it was not user-friendly. So he wrote the book Why We Get Fat as a skimmed down, easy to digest version of Good Calories, Bad Calories. So don't feel like you need to read both books. I did read Why You Get Fat, and I absolutely love it. I'm going to put it in my rotation again. There's so much information in that book. I read Why We Get Fat about 2 years ago, and it was like a light bulb going off because everything he wrote about just made scientific sense. I have a chemical engineering science background, and for me, I was like, okay, this makes logical sense. And it was something I hadn't heard before, which also kind of set up a light bulb as well, because I'm like, why haven't I heard this before? It's not one of those theories you've heard someone say, and oh yeah, I've heard that theory and whatever. But I mean, I really had not heard this before. So for me, it was brand new. And maybe that's another reason why it kind of struck a chord with me. So the first half of the lecture, he sets up the conventional hypothesis of why we get fat as the energy imbalance, also known as consuming more calories than we burn, or sometimes called calories in, calories out. He carefully then, with scientific mind and journalistic kind of integrity, unravels why the hypothesis doesn't hold up to the evidence we have. Remember, this guy is not a doctor, okay? He's a journalist and he's just doing research. The conventional thought is that with increased prosperity comes overeating and therefore the obesity epidemic. He then shows evidence of different groups of people around the world where people were prosperous and slender, but became poor and subsequently overweight. Or groups of people that eat the same, but some are fat and some are thin. For example, mothers that are fat, but their children are suffering from malnutrition. He also mentions the other hypothesis of not moving enough. So it's kind of the yin and yang of the calories in, calories out. So either you're eating too many calories or you're not moving enough. Either way, you have an energy imbalance. And he shows groups around the world of laborers that are fat, but also suffering from undernourishment. Like, how can this happen in, calories out? So some things to note is that, like, eating less doesn't work. And anybody who has tried a general calorie restriction diet can tell you this. I mean, it may work very short term, but not long term. Also, exercising more doesn't seem to work either for weight loss. It's great for stress reduction, cardiovascular health, among other things, but not for weight reduction. So if the theory of calories in, calories out were to be hold true, even a 20 calorie increase a day would result in a 21 pound or a 10 kilogram increase over a decade. And the reason I'm saying this is that no one can hold their calorie balance to that tolerance. That is an accuracy of 0.8% every day, energy in, energy out, in order to hold that balance. That's just not feasible. Even for people who are thin, they're not doing this. He then proceeded to show some pictures, very old pictures from kind of old medical journals and things. One was a picture of two sets of female identical twins. One set was fat, the other set was thin. I mean, identically thin and identically fat, right? And a picture of a fat man versus a fat woman. And why do women and men gain fat in different parts of the body? He just wanted to demonstrate with these pictures, it's like, well, these two are identical people, they're identical twins. They're still, they have technically the same gene set. And you can see that they get fat in exactly the same places, or they stay thin in exactly the same places. And so now he's kind of, going into the alternative theory, which will come in a minute. Similar is to how children mature through puberty. So if you look at two children, a boy and a girl next to each other before puberty, they look very much the same. They have very much the same features in terms of fat and muscle, okay? But when they go through puberty, women gain more fat, especially in the breast area and hips, and men gain more muscle. And this is really, starting to introduce that our alternative hypotheses that obesity is not caused by a calorie imbalance or an energy imbalance. It's a disorder of excess fat accumulation. So overeating and inactivity are effects, not the cause. We don't get fat because we overeat. We overeat because our fat tissue is accumulating excess fat. So I'll say that again. We don't get fat because we overeat. We overeat because our fat tissue is accumulating excess fat. So that brings us to the study of fat, which is also called OBESITY. And in the 1940s, the German scientists and doctors were experts in this field. Now, then World War II happened, and all the theories of fat creation, which were more or less accepted by the world up until that point, after World War II, nobody wanted anything to do with. So if you wanted to study weight gain or loss, fat accumulation, and things like that, you needed to actually learn German because that's where all of the texts were. After World War II, nobody wanted anything to do with the science that the Germans were doing. So this was all lost. I'm getting now to the point of this, that statement that we don't get fat because we overeat. In 1929, Julius Bauer from the University of Vienna summarizes what's called lipophilia, where lipo means fat and philia means love. So literally fat loving. So he's explaining what lipophilia as a disease is, or as an imbalance. So like a malignant tumor, or like the fetus, the uterus or the breasts of a pregnant woman, the abnormal lipophilic tissue seizes on foodstuffs, even in the case of undernutrition. It maintains its stock and may increase it independent of the requirements of the organism. A sort of anarchy exists. The adipose tissue lives for itself and does not fit into the precisely regulated management of the whole organism. So what does that mean? Well, that means that in case you have an imbalance, your fat stores basically are selfish and will continue to stock away calories even at the expense of other systems in the body. And this explains why you can have a fat person who is malnutritioned. The next question is, if obesity is a disorder of excess fat accumulation, what regulates fat accumulation? So this is Adiposity 101, which otherwise known as the regulation of fat. So there are 3 lessons to understand what regulates fat accumulation in your body. The first lesson is triglycerides versus fatty acids. 2 words that I'm sure you have heard of, but are not really sure what the difference is. Is it the same word for fat? Well, kind of, yes and no. They both have to do with fat, but they're different. So first of all, fat is stored as triglycerides, meaning when we want to store energy, we store it as fat, and it's stored as triglycerides. So that's where the form that the fat takes when it's being stored. But fatty acids are what we burn for fuel. So that's where the body's not going to burn triglycerides because that's the storage mechanism. The body's going to burn fatty acids. So fat enters and exits the fat cells as fatty acids. I think I mentioned this before, kind of like a very small chain, right? A very small thing. But inside the cell, the fatty acids continuously cycle into triglycerides and back out again. So it's kind of like in a constant oh, do we need it? No. Okay, go back into triglyceride formula. Do we need it now? No, we don't. Okay, stay in triglycerides. Oh, now we need it. Okay, now you can stay as a fatty acid. Get out there. Go ahead. We're going to use you as energy today. So that's the difference between triglycerides and fatty acids. So now you know. The second lesson is on hormonal regulation. And as I mentioned in the last episode, how your body uses energy is dictated by insulin. When insulin is on, you will not burn fat as energy. I don't know. I think that should be like my mantra. When your insulin is on, you don't burn fat as energy. I think if more people really understood this, they would have a better understanding of how to balance their weight. So in order to release the fatty acids from your fat cell, you need to have a decrease of insulin in the blood. Full stop. That's it. It's pretty easy, actually. Lesson 3, the bottom line. When insulin is secreted or it's chronically elevated in our blood, fat accumulates in fat tissue. Okay, I've mentioned this I don't know how many times before, but when insulin is in the bloodstream, it wants to use glucose, and everything excess goes into fat. And that's when fat is being created, but not being used. When insulin levels drop, fat can escape from the fat tissue, and the fat deposits will shrink. We secrete insulin primarily in response to the carbohydrates in our diet. So therefore, carbohydrate is driving insulin, is driving fat. And as you can see, this very clear, these 3 things to understand how fat is accumulated in your body can turn your world upside down in understanding how to balance your weight and how to affect your health. So again, Triglycerides and fatty acids is the lesson 1. Lesson 2 is hormonal regulation. And lesson 3 is the bottom line, which is carbohydrate is driving insulin, is driving fat. I didn't make that up. That was George Cahill in 2005. As also previously mentioned in episode 11, all carbohydrates are not created equal. We do have what's called fattening carbohydrates, and I guess you could also call this sugars and refined carbohydrates, as I mentioned in episode 11. There's simple carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates, and refined carbohydrates. So refined and simple carbohydrates are those with a high glycemic index. And the glycemic index is an indicator of how quickly a food will break down in the body, or conversely, how quickly and how big the insulin response is to a particular food. The other fattening carbs are like sugar. All sugar is fattening, okay? And you can go back and listen to episode 13, which is all about sugar. The first thing that shocked me when I read the book, Why We Get Fat, which is what this whole lecture is based on, was that the information that Gary Taubes found was known for decades. It was common knowledge in the medical field. It was never taught. It's not something new. Gary Taubes didn't think it up on his own. Again, he's not a doctor. He's not a dietitian. He's a journalist. No, the information that has been around but pushed away by big companies, by political agendas for profit, by doctors who don't want to, for whatever reason, and he talks about this in the book. Why was it pushed down? And I need to go back and reread it. But I just want to bring this out that it's not new information. So for example, in 1951, over 50 years ago, now over 60 years ago, the diet for obesity was to avoid bread and everything made from flour, cereal, potato, and foods containing sugar and all sweets. Just stay away from that. You could eat meat, fish, birds, all green vegetables, eggs, cheese, and fruit except for bananas and grapes because they had too much sugar. This diet was developed in 1951 and was created even before we knew that insulin regulated fat production. So even before we had all of the information that we do now, the diet was stay away from refined carbs and sugar. The conclusion from a biological standpoint, instead of one from a physical standpoint, so the calories in, calories out theory is a physics, thermodynamics theory that all energy is neither created or destroyed, but just transformed, right? And in this case, the conclusion from Gary Taubes, and honestly one that I fully subscribe to, is that obesity is an order of fat accumulation, not energy balance. And fat accumulation is regulated fundamentally by insulin and dietary carbohydrates. And the only non-pharmaceutical remedy is to restrict or remove the causative agent, which in this case is carbohydrates. So if those are the 3 things that you can take from this is really awesome. And I really so highly recommend that you read his books. This information from Gary Taubes was in a book in 2007, and that was kind of the beginning of a review of the old clinical data that he's pulling out. And when we start to see a resurgence of low refined carb diets like the Paleolithic diet, which dates back actually to the 1890s, seriously, the paleo diet is not a new fad. This diet has been around for over 100 years. The ketogenic diet dates back to the 1920s. So as you can see, this is not new, but somehow for the last 60, 70 years, we've been fed a bunch of lies about what we should be eating from governmental standards. You need to think and listen for yourself. Use your own body as your own experiment, and just listen to your body and try different things out and see what works for you. Don't listen to the government, for sure. So this was only a brief summary. When you get a chance, I've linked one of his discussions on YouTube so you can see it for yourself. And also I will link several of his books into the show notes so you can go and check those out. Next, we learned about volumetrics. This is a pretty simple theory where you only really need a certain volume of food to feel full. So volumetrics, volume of food. So let's say you eat a whole head of broccoli, or you could eat the equivalent number of calories in a couple of French fries. Let's be honest, right? You will feel fuller from the broccoli. You will feel satiated from the broccoli. And this is also tying into calorie density of different foods. So let's stick with the broccoli here. If the broccoli in this case is less calorie dense than French fries. So another way of saying that is you need to eat far more broccoli to equal the same amount of calories as in French fries. So if you aim to eat less calorie dense food, you will not physically be able to overfeed yourself due to the sheer volume of food that you would need to eat. It's a good concept if you think about it. I'm currently using an app called Noom, Noom, or Nom. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it. And this is one of the things, it's kind of like a health coaching app. So I'm just testing this out and kind of seeing how it works. And in this app, they have green foods, yellow foods, and red foods. And it's not meaning good or bad or better or whatever. They have described green, yellow, and red as their different calorie densities of the foods. So if a green food like broccoli, you can eat as much as you want of this because it's really almost impossible to overeat it. Whereas something like butter or breads or something else which are more calorie dense are in the red section, then they're just like, you can eat those, but limit how much you're eating of those. So it's actually a pretty good visual to see in terms of calorie density where your foods lie. So if you're interested in seeing that, you can do a 10-day trial for Nom and kind of learn the different calorie densities of food. BMI, Body Mass Index. Have you ever heard of this number? I'm pretty sure you have, and you might even know what your number is. Currently, this is the number used to distinguish or label someone as thin or obese and anywhere in between. The formula and scale are used almost everywhere to give a rough guideline on the health of an individual. There are problems, though, with BMI. One, BMI doesn't really distinguish between fat and muscle. Number two, it doesn't really account for where the weight is located. And three, it doesn't really account for the frame of the person. So what is BMI? BMI is a measure of your height over your weight or something like this. So weight over height and some other formula calculations. You can look it up on Google, BMI, and you can find tons of BMI calculators. But if essentially the variables that are used are your height and your weight. And it doesn't, like I mentioned, take into account anything about fat versus muscle because we all know muscle weighs more than fat. And it doesn't talk about the person's frame. Are they a larger frame or a thinner frame? So what really matters more is the amount of fat that we have stored and where in the body is it stored. So just keep in mind when you see your number, it's not a true representation of yourself. It's really just a number that can kind of help to normalize a discussion. You can say so many people are overweight or obese. My number is 31. So by this scale, I'm technically obese. However, anyone who has seen me would not call me obese. Yes, I have a few extra pounds, but I would not, nobody would look at me and go, oh, wow, she's obese. So just take the number with a grain of salt. This module 12 packed in a lot of different things into 1 week. The next thing we learned was about the metabolic typing diet, which was created by Dr. William L. Wolcott. His theory is that genetics, lifestyle, environmental stressors, and that ever-shifting needs of our body really dictates the best food choices for our unique biochemistry. Dr. Wolcott's diet is based on the research of Dr. Weston Price. Dr. Price noticed that indigenous cultures from all around the world followed very different diets, but also suffered far less from chronic diseases. But when those cultures adopted a more modern diet, meaning increasing their refined carbohydrates and sugars, their rates of disease increased. So this theory suggests that we may be genetically adapted for a specific diet, and when we stray from that diet, our health is compromised. Let me explain a bit more in detail about the diet. So this dietary style teaches that each individual has a unique response to different macronutrients. Macronutrients are carbs, protein, and fat. Some individuals are able to break down the nutrients very quickly, and while others break them down slowly. So these individuals who oxidize or break down the nutrients quickly do best on slow-burning energy forms like fat and protein. Individuals who oxidize nutrients more slowly may respond better to a diet composed of foods that are more quickly digested, like carbohydrates. So they provide you with a quiz. Of course, I took the quiz, and my results are that I am a protein type or a fast oxidizer, which means that I should be better at eating slow-burning energy sources like protein and fat, with a limited intake of carbohydrates, sticking mostly to whole grains, vegetables, and fruits, which basically to me sounds like the paleo diet and the ketogenic diet. The slow oxidizers, or the carbo type people, do well with a high carbohydrate intake and low fat and relatively low protein. You can also be a mixed oxidizer who doesn't show basically a metabolic imbalance towards one or the other and can basically eat anything. So I would call these people probably normal, right? So I'm not sure yet what I think about this theory. I haven't heard about this theory before. I think it has something to do, I think it's something to research more. And, I got sucked into YouTube land more frequently than I care to admit. But on there, I have seen people talking about a high-carb diet, low-fat diet, and really thriving. The people eating just a bunch of fruit and no fat and really getting through. Then there are people who have tried the same diet and had horrible results. And I guess that this theory could really explain the differences between those groups. And the same goes for people on the paleo or keto diet. It just doesn't work for everyone. So maybe this kind of I'm not sure if the theory on its own is relevant, but maybe it's relevant, obviously, but I think it ties in and explains other things, but I don't think it's a good enough theory to stand alone on its own as a way of approaching your dietary styles. The Institute for Integrative Nutrition teaches the concept of bioindividuality, which just means that not all food or diets work well for every person. That's it. So that just about wraps it up for episode 14, but I do have listener mail to share with you. Dun, 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 dun. Anna from Portugal writes to me, I came across your podcast because I enrolled for IIN starting in March. So I am a podcast optimist and I searched IIN and I gladly found you. Thanks for sharing your impressions and experience. I love listening to you. So thank you, Anna, for your email. That really made my day and encourages me to know that there are people finding the podcast helpful or at least entertaining. If you'd like to get in touch with me, send an email to becomingahealthcoach@gmail.com or head over to my website, mybestself.fit, and leave a comment there. While you are there, make sure to follow my site to be notified of the newest episodes and all the other articles that I post. You can also subscribe through Apple Podcasts, a new source I found out called Player FM, or whatever podcast listening service you use. Until next time, I'm Megan McCrory, and you've been listening to How I'm Becoming a Health Coach. Stay happy and healthy. Hey, you're still listening. Great. Okay. Now I can tell you about my 12-week goal setting session. So in this 1-hour session, I'm going to help guide you through a powerful process inspired by the best-selling book, The 12-Week Year. I know. Everybody at this time of the year starts to think about year-long goals. And I would argue that year-long goals are really hard to contextualize. What is going to be happening in a year from now? You have no idea. But 12 weeks gives you a little bit better understanding because you kind of already have your calendar booked out for the next 12 weeks, kind of know what's going to be going on. So if you can focus your goals on the next 12 weeks, you can make some really big actionable steps towards your long-term vision. So in this 1-hour session, we do talk about long-term vision. We talk about where you want to be. We talk about what your 5-year, 10-year, 3-year, all those goals are. But that's only a brief part. We know we see the long distance view, but let's break that down. And then we get into the 1 to 3 strategic 12-week goals that are going to get you to those long-term vision. Then we're going to put that into a really cool action plan with like checklists and timing and all that jazz to make sure that you are clear and that you have accountability to get those goals done. And then that's not it. Then we are going to tackle your roadblocks because you know you have roadblocks. So we're going to tackle those roadblocks. We're going to create a plan to overcome them. So you know when you start to self-sabotage, you know what you can do to get around those roadblocks. Okay, so if this is interesting for you, it is only 1 hour of your time and it's only 45 Swiss francs. I host this gig over on Fiverr, but I'm also going to put a link down in the show notes. So if you're interested, hit me up.